Hello and welcome to the Game Football Podcast from The Times. They've done it. They've finally bloody done it. After 70 years of hurt and several near misses, Newcastle United have won a domestic trophy, beating Liverpool 2-1 to lift the Carabao Cup. On today's show, we'll discuss Dan Burns' heroics, Eddie Howe's tactics, Joe Linton's tackles, and Liverpool's rather limp display at Wembley. We'll also discuss Fulham's win at Tottenham. We'll also discuss Fulham's win against Tottenham, Thomas Tuchel's first England squad, and much, much more. I'm Tom Clark, and joining me today we have the senior sports writer and Sunday Times columnist Alison Rudd, the former footballer turned journalist Gregor Robertson, and fresh from Wembley Way, the Times Northern sports correspondent Martin Hardy joins us this morning. Martin, hello.
Hello.
Hello. That's a rather subdued hello. Come on, try another one.
I'm just trying to get my voice working again.
Hello. We're welcome. Happy? Buzzing?
Oh, no. I can't.
You never have to write that piece again, Martin. That beautiful piece.
Is this me
wrote,
done now? Is this my time's done? Am I getting my cards here?
That beautiful piece that you wrote at the weekend about 70 years of hurt. Wonderful piece, talking to lots of people involved with Newcastle United who've been there for those near misses. You never have to write a piece again. I never have to edit it again. It's a wonderful day.
I genuinely don't know where to start. I'm not sure why Gregor or Ali are here, because once I start, I won't stop. All right? Seriously, get yourselves off.
Great. Happy days.
Where do I start? 2 minutes ago, I'm late because I was chatting to my mum, who I hadn't spoke to yesterday.
Don't play the mum card.
She used to have a season ticket in 1969. She was at St James's Park to watch Newcastle against Rangers. My sister was a month away from coming when the 10,000 Rangers fans ran on the pitch, to which my nana was mortified. My dad's on holiday in Spain. He's drinking whiskey. He's drunk. I've spoke to my sister who lives in Seaton Sluice. You won't know where Seaton Sluice is. I live at the coast. Seaton Sluice is along the coast.
Sounds horrible.
Don't you start.
And spoke to her. She phoned. I was like, I've got to get off. I've got to do the podcast. But it's my sister phoned us. I phoned her back, and she was in Newcastle yesterday, and she said, unbelievable last night. She went, look, I woke up on, this is yesterday morning, Sunday morning. Seaton Sluice is about probably 3 or 4 miles away from Blythe. There's a Seaton Sluice school next to where she lives. She took a picture because there was a rainbow shining on Blythe yesterday morning. Everything drops into place. My friend Mike, known as Biffa, runs a brilliant website called nufc.com. Superb on statistics. One of my closest friends just sent me a text this morning. I am going to swear now 2 words. Each went, hell. to go back to the piece we did on Saturday, which started with Malcolm MacDonald going back 54 years, back to 1971, and him judging the Miss Tyne and Weir competition in a swimming pool that's now a rock pool that's now closed. Malcolm's final line when I said, what will you do if Newcastle win on Sunday, was he said, I will die happy. My friend's next message was, what do we have to do now? Kill Malcolm?
There you go. Thank you for listening to the Game Football Podcast from The Times. Thank you to Martin Hardy, Gregor Robertson, and Alison Rudd. There we go. We could have just wrapped up. Martin, that's a wonderful summary that sums up what it means, why it does matter so much to Newcastle United, why this has been such a big build-up.
I haven't even started yet.
But let's...
My son, hang on. My son who will have a great deal, who was with me
Neil,
for this weekend.
fade out.
who was 18 and... Parents, how many parents have we got here? Any parents? There's that moment which you haven't come to, Gregor, where they don't need your hand to cross the road, and it's quite a sad moment. So 2 years ago, probably, we had a sad personal moment where I hugged my 16-year-old son, and you suddenly realise that he's going to the gym and he's a young man and he's got a different physique. And I was back at the hotel last night, probably 2:15, 2:30. One of the few bars in London open was the one that Amy Winehouse used to frequent, which is where we ended up. So I was waiting for him to come in, and I really wanted to see him when the game had finished. That was one of the regrets yesterday. I just thought he was sending us a text saying, what a moment, all of that kind of stuff. And I was waiting for him at 2:15, and we just hugged each other, and it was like, you on the, everybody's just in tears, the whole thing. It may be a more beautiful moment because it might be the last time that it's Newcastle United, where it's just Geordies, people that I've known all my life. If the club is going to double its revenue at 640 to become competitive with Liverpool more regularly, then it will change, and they want different fans and they want a different ground. But that was Newcastle United that won that cup yesterday, and it meant more for that. Everybody there, the two lads who I didn't know getting on the train at Wembley Park at whatever time, it was 9:30, so drunk they were heading in the wrong direction. And you're like,
9:30 in the morning?
lads, these are going the wrong way. Okay. My reward for that was to be given a can of rum and coke. And I was like, that's absolutely perfect. Another bloke waddled over, he went, Martin, he says, I know you're from Sainsbury's in Monk Seaton. I've never spoken to you before. I didn't know what to say. Should we go for a pint? Right, we'll go for a pint. None of the pubs were open.
I know you're from Sainsbury's. That's the most northern thing anyone's ever said on this podcast.
So I have to try and explain what it's like. So when journalists work in the Northeast, I say, is it like this? Neil Moxley, who works in the Midlands, worked in the Northeast, but he said it's not like this in the Midlands. How can I describe it best? If I do, the Sky back pages and I finish at 11, my mum will ring at 11:30 and the conversation will start. I'll say, how are you doing? My mum's 84. How are you doing? Is everything all right? And I'll look at my phone and I'll time it and it never gets past 2 minutes before. What's he doing playing Nick Pope in goal? What's he doing at left back? And I'm like, Mum, it's 11:30 at night.
Sounds like we should have got your mum on. Never mind.
Everything I've done today has been either thinking about Newcastle United or writing about Newcastle United or talking about Newcastle United. Please give me some grace. So the conversation will move for about a minute. Then she'll trick us to go, what are you doing at work at the minute? I was like, well, I was at a press conference this morning. I said, you've done it again. We're talking about Newcastle United. So it's relentless.
It's an obsession.
Which is why it's a huge club in the Northeast. That's what it is. It's not Liverpool. It's not Manchester United. You realise that as a writer, because if you write a story on Manchester United, the reaction is much bigger.
Yeah.
But the intensity, in speaking to Matt Ritchie for the piece we did on Saturday, he said it's the most intense place you can get for the football club. He said, but I loved that. I fed off that. So the people that are successful, like Eddie Howe, like Joe Linton, good grief, was brilliant yesterday. They feed off that, and it becomes a strength.
Right, we can catch your breath. You've got 30 seconds. I'm going to ask Gregor, because I was going to ask you, Martin. First, I was going to say it was a deserved win, because I think that's also important, but I'm going to ask Gregor first. It was a deserved win. Newcastle were the better team, because I think going into this game, Martin, we were talking about before, Liverpool have been so brilliant this season, but Newcastle, Gregor, on the day, just in footballing terms, Martin's talked beautifully there about what it means, but in footballing terms, Newcastle were by far the better team.
By a country mile. Just like the conviction and everything he did from the very first moment of the game. It was just like, it sounds simplistic to say one team wanted it more than the other, but that's what it looked like. And you can, when you hear what Martin's saying there, you can understand why. And it's not entirely true, because Liverpool clearly wanted to win that final, but you could just see how much it meant and how much Newcastle were desperate to, particularly after losing 2 years ago, to take this moment, this opportunity, because they knew what it meant to everyone. So that was just writ large over this entire game. And the midfield, my God, for the second time in a week, Liverpool's midfield was just completely trampled all over. Like against Paris Saint-Germain, it was more like in a footballing sense. Yeah. In this sense, there was still in a footballing sense, but also physically. My God, Joe Ellington, he went a bit early with the cheers for the tackle.
I was going to ask.
You know how I feel about them.
Yes.
But again, you can't blame him. Tonali as well was just like a force of nature. So was Bruno. They were outstanding. Always got that threat with Isak running behind, and I thought Trippier as well. Trippier was like
he had
a little wobble when he was feeling his hammy, and there was a kind of one or two loose passes. But apart from that, he was immaculate, and you could see all of that stuff about how much it meant in him as well. The way he was playing, it was like he was just so determined to lift the trophy, and he did.
I think the most impressive thing about the footballing display from Newcastle was that they, given everything that Martin has just said about the history and the emotion, and it's always seeped into the football, I feel, in the past when they've had big moments, they've become overawed by it, or try too hard, or become startled by the enormity of winning that first trophy. They didn't do that this time. Instead, they flipped it and they fed off the desire. And so you had this direct link from the stands to the pitch, where every player, I felt, for Newcastle played probably the best I've seen them play under Eddie Howe, that in terms of effort, commitment, bravery, not being overawed by the occasion. I fully expected Newcastle to be a little bit wobbly by the opposition, and so it was really interesting to hear that Eddie Howe was thinking ahead, like he was saying when they played Liverpool in the league, that amazing 3-3, he was holding stuff back to surprise Liverpool when they met again. It was like he's been thinking for a while about how not to fall at the Wembley hurdle this time. And to get that right, I think, is a great testament to a great coach. But I do feel really emotional and upset that a lot of people are glossing over the fact that this is a sports washing enterprise. And I've read what you've written, Martin, and I heard what you said about this might be the last Newcastle win as Newcastle. But the fact remains they are owned by a state. They are owned by the Saudi Investment Fund. And this will go on their record as what they have achieved with Newcastle as a sports washing enterprise. And I think
Newcastle fans can do nothing about that.
The ownership's relationship to this victory, I think, does tarnish it. Actually,
I can't agree with that. Newcastle fans didn't. They didn't give the green light to the Saudi takeover. Whether or not I was comfortable with that is a conversation for a different day. The reason why which I wrote there, this was the last chance to do this because of the 3 transfer windows where they couldn't play it. This was a team down to its bare bones, and it felt like Newcastle United. 2 years ago, it felt much more like a Saudi, and it may feel like a Saudi PIF club more in the future, but it doesn't at the minute because they have no players. They are scratching around for a right winger. Eddie Howe has had to make Joe Linton and Jacob Murphy and Fabian Schär into top players, whereas everybody 4 years ago thought those 3 have gone straight away. That was Newcastle United yesterday, and yes, the finance, you would have liked it to come from a better place, but the club was dying under Mike Ashley, and it would never have got there, and it was bit by bit was fading away. I can't decide who owns Newcastle United. The Premier League eventually give the green light, perhaps with a bit of government pushing to end up with PIF having an 80% and increased shareholding at the club, but that wasn't just not there yesterday. That was black and white. That was Newcastle United. It was fans who I've seen go for 40 years, many of them who didn't agree with the Saudi takeover, but they were there supporting the football team that they've supported all their life, and they will support that team when PIF decide they don't want the football club anymore. And they supported the team when it was Freddie Shepherd and the News of the World story. They've supported the club when it was Mike Ashley and Sports Direct. I'm not quite sure what the fan can do here. Do they walk away from the football club? It's very difficult. It was a difficult time when the takeover went through. But yeah, and yes, the seller scarves, but it's still black and white. And that was Newcastle United Football Club at Wembley yesterday. It wasn't PIF.
Martin, you talked very emotionally at the start about what it means, and you've answered Alison's point there very eloquently, I would say. I'd actually like to ask you about the football, because that was what I was going to ask you about the very start. Good. Greg has talked about it, Alison's talked about the football, and Alison's brought up the very important point about the sports washing issue, which you've talked about. But just on the football, on those players, because you've talked about some of them there, some of these players that Eddie Howe's got more out of, and then some of his, let's be honest, superstar players as well, like Alexander Isak. Do you agree with Gregor and Alison that all those players did take all that emotion with them in a positive way? Was this one of their best performances in terms of effort and desire and physicality, like the guys have mentioned?
No, definitely. They won at Leeds, a game that doesn't get mentioned, when they were on the brink of being relegated. And Eddie Howe, that 1-0 win at Elland Road was one of the big games, the turning point. And then they went away, and that provided with a platform to stay up. I don't think any team had ever stayed up after not winning the first 11 games. The PSG home game, 4-1, the emotion of being back in the Champions League is up there. The 2 Arsenal games in the semi-final, he got everything out of that team. And you have theories before a match, and sometimes they're complete and utter garbage, and sometimes they're spot on. And for this one, the Tuesday night was a disaster for Liverpool, because if you check the stats of the last 8 games going into the final, the only game they'd won their duels was against Newcastle in the 2-0, when Newcastle were a little bit insipid. I think that was the game you're referring to, not the 3-3. So you thought, Newcastle, if they can get the physicality right. Spoke to Eddie Howe. He was at the Football Writers' Do on the day Newcastle got beat by Brighton, in which Lewis Hall's injury was confirmed privately, and which Anthony Gordon got sent off. And I went over to his table and I said, "What on earth are you doing here?" And he said, "It's an obligation." He said, "What a day, what a nightmare." And it's that kind of gallows humour of could anything else have gone wrong? And we realised Botman was going to be out, although Botman hasn't played, so he would have been at best a substitute. But he's a great believer in everything happens for a reason. And even in the midst of that night, he's just lost Anthony Gordon, one of his weapons. And Newcastle was struggling for form, although getting knocked out of the FA Cup was actually a good thing. It should have happened to Birmingham, and therefore they wouldn't have lost Anthony Gordon. But what he said was, even in that moment of, I've just lost a great player, was it creates an opportunity for somebody else. Now, I'm not sure that was how it worked out, but that game, Joe Linton got 60 minutes recovering from an injury. We've got 60 minutes into Joe. That's really important. What it created, like 2 months ago on this podcast, I'm sure Martin Samuel and yourself, Greg, was talking about Newcastle potentially having the best midfield in the country. And in hindsight, the mood goes up and it goes down. So everyone in Newcastle, we've got the best midfield in the country. A couple of weeks later, the midfield's useless. It's rubbish. Bruno, what's he doing? This, that, and the other. But they were superb yesterday. So they ran all over. And I don't like the celebrating to the crowd either. But Joe Linton, the player that
I'm miserable, Martin. Don't worry.
No. I'd argue my son about it.
They were celebrating throw-ins at the end. That's what I was going to ask Greg.
That was brilliant, though. That was a great end.
They were brilliant in the corner.
Yeah, that bit in the corner.
But sorry, the Joe Linton story goes back to when Steve Bruce was in charge, and he was a centre forward, and he was a £40 million waste of money. And Newcastle played Rochdale away on a soaking wet day, and I was underneath the stand at Spotland with all the cables and TVs. It had been a draw. There was an FA Cup replay, and Joe Linton had been jeered by some of the Newcastle fans. And he had to do the drug test, and he was there walking around dodging these cables in his flip-flops. Looked like the most miserable man you've ever seen.
In Rochdale, and I can sympathise with that.
The bus left without him. Oh. He got a lift home by somebody. From that to what you saw yesterday, one of the most powerful midfielders in the Premier League is incredible. And to come back to what Ali said, that tie-in between the players and the fans at the club has been very much orchestrated from day one from Eddie Howe. That's his biggest achievement, to get everybody pointing in the right direction.
We shouldn't reduce this to blood and guts and stuff either. There was a lot of intelligence on display in this game because of the way that they pressed in the first half in particular and didn't really allow Liverpool to play it out from the back. And then in moments when they kind of had a low block and they were really obdurate defensively. But then the set plays as well. Like Howe said, he'd worked on them for 2 weeks. Like they knew this was going to be a huge avenue for them to get at Liverpool, and when you know that a team's playing like partly zonal and partly man marking, and your best headers of the ball are going to be zonal, Liverpool's like Van Dijk and Konate and whatnot, then you get your biggest man out the way of them and just kept firing the ball, and they couldn't do anything about it. There was one corner where they looked like they were going to change their setup and get somebody that wasn't McAllister marking Byrne, but they just it was smart. So, and that ultimately turned the game. So, a lot of intelligence on display. And Eddie Howe, we've not spoken a lot about. He's there were some eyebrows raised when he got the job. Then not long ago, people wanted him to get the England job. Like he's the best of English managers just now, and for a long time that you have.
You spoke before about how well Newcastle played. For it to be 2-1 was a travesty. It should have been 4 or 5-0. Newcastle were miles better. But then you're sitting with 500 words for the back page written. Everything's good. A certain Tom Clark says, I've been putting this off because I didn't want to tempt fate.
I knew you were going to dob me in for this.
As soon as I saw, what have you sent me that for? This is the plan. Newcastle are going to win. And I was like,
just to be clear, this I was sat on this email in the office going, how late can I? Because I wanted to be like, right, Martin, we need to do this. They've won it. We need this piece from you. What does it mean, etc. Martin Samuel's going to write this. This is what it means. And I left it until the 92nd minute.
Maybe it's 91st.
I had it written from about 70. That's the kind of editor's job. You're thinking, planning for all the eventualities. And I was like, he'll kill me if I send this anytime. And I literally sent it, and Chiesa scored a minute later.
And the thing with the Chiesa goal is he was so onside.
He was,
the second you watch it, of all the moments where the linesman don't flag, this is one when he has flagged. And boring part of the conversation, the VAR is so bad that the Liverpool players are back in place for a kickoff before anybody else in the stadium knows that it's an actual goal. And you think the fans should, and the Newcastle fans heard the microphone as offside because they didn't hear on, so they start celebrating. Then the Liverpool fans start celebrating. And I'm going, it's 2-1. We've got a 500-word back page right off. Newcastle United have.
And I'm asking you for a what it means piece.
And I'm like, we've now got 4 minutes of absolute hell.
They played that brilliantly, though. Yeah. They played that absolutely brilliantly.
They did. But there's just that moment in your mind which is like, it's going to go to extra time. They're going to get beat. This is going to be the worst day ever. I'm going to have to.
Makes it better in the end, though,
I've just wasted 500 words.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to being a northerner, by the way.
You couldn't celebrate the end. It was just relief. It should have been 3-0. It should have been the repeat of 1974. It should have been. Isaac 2, Burn 1, Newcastle 3, Liverpool none. That's how it should have been. Not something. Liverpool none. That's how it should have went. Instead of which is 2-1, and it's like they might blow this.
He's enjoyed it so much he wanted a bigger win. The reason for that, Alison, is that Liverpool, this was not their finest game.
Not their finest hour at all.
I just had an interesting stat which I think summed it up. Mo Salah failed to record a shot or create a chance for Liverpool in a game which he started for only the third time in his Liverpool career. The other matches were Arsenal in the League Cup, where he played 61 minutes, and Paris Saint-Germain in the Champions League tie. He was incredibly quiet in this game, but the whole team felt a little bit like they've slightly run out of steam. Obviously, part of that is that they are going to win the Premier League and they are going to be brilliant league champions. But Martin Samuel has written a piece in the paper this morning just saying that maybe this is a sign of a team that were superb at the start, superb in the middle, and are now not quite brilliant at the end, which is fine. But would you agree with that?
Well, we don't know what the end will look like.
Absolutely.
I did feel for Paul Joyce having to give Mo Salah a 4 out of 10. I bet he can't believe he actually typed that. I mean, because
But I would say fair.
Oh no, absolutely.
Absolutely fair.
But the reason Mo Salah normally gets 8 or 9, or maybe even a 10, is because on his own he can change games that are a bit stalematey, or you kind of feel like Liverpool being a bit quiet. It's okay, they've got Mo Salah. And even in those games, he has been quiet. I mean, it has been a mark of the season that he will probably win the Footballer of the Year. But you could actually put together a highlights reel where he does very little for 60 minutes, and then suddenly he bursts into life. And I like players like that because it means they're thinking the whole time. They're not getting lucky. It means they're just biding their time for the right moment when the fullback marking them has got a bit leggy, or they've been working out where the spaces will come. So it's a very sort of intellectual style of play, not just reliant on his pace and his trademark finish and so on. But Newcastle sort of suffocated passes to him. He wasn't getting any service. And he's not the sort of player that can sort of become something different, become a scrapper to try and win something himself. He's reliant on a reasonably well-oiled machine, and Liverpool did not look at all well-oiled. And it felt, from a Liverpool perspective, there was something, a slight out-of-body experience watching Slot throwing on an attacker after. Are we 3 at the back? Are we 2 at the back now?
Yeah, that was crazy, wasn't it?
Virgil van Dijk was up from by the finish.
Yes, it's Virgil van Dijk playing. We've got enough forwards on the pitch. Oh, well, we're turning defenders into forwards now as well, which means we're just going to completely lose all sense of distribution and control in the middle. And in a sense, you could say, well, it sort of worked because the Kaiser goal was a very nice goal. It was a really nice goal, nicely timed, nicely finished. Bit late in the day, but
perfectly timed, actually, I'd say.
But yes, from Tom Clark's point of view, but perfectly timed, made him look like a genius. But but there was a fleeting moment where I in my Sunday Times column, I'd written a piece praising Slot's calmness, like he's almost like an artificial intelligence manager. He's like other managers must feel like they're playing against a chess computer because he's quite logical and doesn't overtly show an emotional response to the match. And here he was, Slot, the ultimate calm new manager to the Premier League, up against a manager who has learnt how to use emotion, I would say, and time the use of that emotion. And Slot's, it was like watching a computer have a bit of water poured on the keyboard. It went a bit sizzle, sizzle. And it felt out of character for him to just throw the kitchen sink at the match, because that has not been the way Liverpool are going to win the league.
I just think it's quite extraordinary how much Eddie Howe has changed, or his team has changed. Like, not Newcastle, but from what we knew at Bournemouth, Newcastle are now one of the best teams in the country out of possession. Like they have been under his management. Defensively, they're outstanding. The way they press, they're horrible to play against at their best. And they always say it, and he always says it. He says the thing we need is the intensity that we play with. That's what makes us basically. And this was like the epitome of Newcastle United and being horrible to play against. And so I give the credit to them. Liverpool were below par. I think there's we should possibly point out with the Salah conversation of late that it's Ramadan as well.
Yeah.
But I give the credit to Newcastle personally. I think from the very start they suffocated Liverpool, and they would have had to be like, I don't know what you would have done to play through Newcastle, and particularly in that first half.
Eddie Howe says to me, this opens the door for another player. Sorry. So Tino Livramento, and you listen to the managers and they'll tell you something, and he says Livramento's a brilliant runner. So watch him. He's just a natural athlete. He's right-footed. He's playing at left back. Salah wants to cut in and he's left all the time. It was actually the perfect match to take care of him. I don't think this is a great Liverpool team. I think this is a 2016 title. It's like Leicester, Man City are poor, Arsenal aren't great. It's a year where if you're okay,
he's
you'll
coming
win
in swinging today, man.
Yeah, it's not a great team. There's not a great centre forward. That moment where from the PSG end where they videoed Salah's reaction to Darwin Núñez missing a penalty is, I think, that's his career at Liverpool done. He is a player that before that game with interviewing Steve McManaman said, I want to win the Ballon. McManaman said, do you want to win the Ballon d'Or? To win the Ballon d'Or, we have to win the Premier League and the Champions League. That moment, Núñez misses the penalty. Van Dijk, I don't know if you've seen it, Van Dijk walks to console him. Every other Liverpool player walks to console him, and Salah stays put because Salah knows that he's just cost him the Champions League and the Ballon d'Or, and you want to really extrapolate the curve. I knew it would be you because you're not at the same level as me.
So is that not what the big players do, though? Like Cristiano Ronaldo and all that?
Yeah, exactly. So I think yesterday was potentially the end of that Newcastle team cycle in certain respects. Maybe it's Kieran Trippier and Callum Wilson, players that have been and done a good job. But I also think it's the end of that Liverpool team. This is not Slot's team. This is Klopp's team that Slot's trying to make play in a Slot way. So Salah could be gone. Van Dijk could be gone. Trent wasn't playing yesterday. He could be gone. And the calmness of Slot slipped at Everton, and you can't get that back. Once you're on the pitch screaming at the referee, you effing cost me the title, you're not quite the cool bloke that you were when every game was being won. Yesterday, he couldn't find the answers. As somebody who watches Miracle a lot, the film from 1980 with Herb Brooks, that moment when America were about to beat Russia, and he says he doesn't know what to do. The Russian coach does not know what to do. And yesterday, Slot didn't know what to do. Put Van Dijk up front, do anything. I can't turn this game. We're beaten, and I stand by. It was a 4-0 game that's recorded as a 2-1, and it was optimistic. Newcastle fans were optimistic going into the game, but it was a 4-1 bet on one game for Newcastle to win. Yeah. So they were the outsiders. Yeah. But they got every little bit right. And within there is Dan Burn performing the game of his absolute life.
Yeah, we'll come back to Dan Burn probably at the end of the show when we talk about England as well. Alison, your reaction to Martin's points about this Liverpool team, it being Jurgen Klopp's team, it being Arne Slot's team in adaptation, some of those players that Martin talked about there, and then Martin, I'll come back to you to talk about this Newcastle team going forward as well.
Well, in football, every team is the team of the manager before you because there is always a transition period. I don't think you can throw that as a criticism of Arne Slot that he's come in, taken over a team that existed. All you can do is say, wow, you weren't overawed by it and you managed to get the players on side to play for you, and they might easily have felt a bit sort of ho-hum about Klopp going and all the, how amazing Klopp was at motivation and just lifting spirits and wanting to entertain, and someone quite sort of different comes in. It could have been underwhelming for them. So the fact that they lifted themselves to hit the ground running and establish an early lead in the Premier League title race is to Slot's credit.
But
you agree with me.
But of course,
it's not heavy metal, is it?
It's not heavy metal, and I was determined not to mention that.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
It hasn't felt like as joyous as some of the wins under Klopp. I will admit.
Martin, what have you done?
I will admit that. But
you were doing so well, Martin. It was great to have you.
I don't think it's fair to slag off Mo Salah's reaction to going out of the Champions League, because you want your star players to really have that hunger and single-mindedness to want to win it.
But it was how he would bounce back yesterday, and he didn't. So the hope was that he was so crestfallen that he would take it in that game, and he did.
But he, for all we know, he might be feeling it is his fault. He might be feeling the weight of having let his team down, rather than being an arrogance that means he's out the door in a few months' time.
No, it's not arrogance. It's not his fault. It was somebody else's fault. Some player that I think he knew wasn't good enough to win Liverpool the Champions League. And I think if you said Arne Slot, do you think this team is the team that you want to win the Champions League? You'd say no. No, there was no summer signings last summer, was there?
Chiesa, other than Chiesa.
Who's barely played.
Yeah. I mean, the question. One question might be maybe if Liverpool had made a signing in the January window, would that have given them that little bit of oomph?
Yeah.
But I don't know who that would have been. But if it would have given them the oomph in these games where they have looked tired. I mean, they were outplayed physically, emotionally, and tactically by Newcastle. But I felt in extra time against PSG, it was tiredness.
Yeah.
It was tiredness in that extra time because they'd played very well up until that point.
I feel like this podcast took about 4 months to give Arne Slot and this Liverpool team any credit whatsoever. And
Not from me, mate. I said
and then we've had
it.
a couple of months where like, God, maybe they are really good. Yeah, they're overcoming every hurdle, and they've had a bad week, a really bad week, and this is always going to come to this point, a crunch moment in the season, and they weren't quite at the level of PSG. I think if you put them up against most other teams in Europe right now, I'm trying to think, they would have given them a really good game and they might have won.
Yeah.
So I don't think we can go too far in the criticism of Liverpool and Arne Slot in particular and this team off the back of 2 results. I think there is a conversation to be had about the strength of the Premier League because there's a lot of strength where there isn't. Usually, if you can put it like that, in like terms of the middle class of the league.
The middle teams will rise.
But
and
the challengers are undoubtedly weaker this season.
Yeah.
But to be 12 points clear, with the title almost
Just
so
say-
I
just-
think in the first season as well, again, I'd underline it, the first season after replacing someone who will go down in history as a legend, how many times have we seen that happen at other clubs and it's been a disaster? We've had a decade lost. So I think we can still give Arne Slot some real credit.
Just say both things can be true, mate. It's your catchphrase. Just say it. It's fine. Martin, I just wanted to finish with you with Newcastle. The average age of their starting 11, 29 years and 13 days, the oldest in a League Cup final since Manchester City against Arsenal in 2018. Slightly talks to your point, an overall theme that you're saying that this might be a joyous end to a bit of an era, both. But do you think that on the pitch, Eddie Howe now, Newcastle legend, in folklore forever, grandsons will be talking about Eddie Howe, he did it, he ended it. Can he now go on and take this team, keep keep these players, add to these players, go on? Because you've got to win another one now.
Yeah, but
Can't wait another 70 years.
Everything comes back to numbers. So you turnover is 320 million, and that has increased from 140 million at the takeover. What, Man City 700 million, Liverpool 600, I'm guessing. 500, 600 is the target you want. So Newcastle financially cannot compete. So what Newcastle United needed to buy last summer was a right-sided centre-half, a young one. They tried to get Gay, couldn't do the deal. They desperately wanted to sign a young right-sided forward. They couldn't do it. So they know where the problems in the squad are. They won't have Newcastle fans, they will not have bucket loads of cash this summer to spend because they're limited by PSR. So they're going to have to be very clever, and it would be very, very difficult. The squad has been pruned by Elliot Anderson, who was in the Newcastle end yesterday, by the way, celebrating. The sale of Minte and Anderson for 70 million stopped them getting a points deduction. They then sold Miguel Almiron and Lloyd Kelly in January. So that's 4 players gone. You have a couple of players injured. Your squad's really, really light. So the squad is very, very fragile and small at the minute. And they don't have a lot of cash to add to it. It always leads back to, at some point, some people say they will have to make a big sale. If Newcastle stay in the Champions League, if they win a trophy, which they did yesterday, that makes the likelihood of keeping Alex and it is like that bit higher, but it's not nailed on that he'll stay, because at some point they need more cash to come into the club so they can start to trade. The squad is not good enough at the minute to compete at the top end of the table and in cups. That was proven last season. The squad is a year older, so they need young blood. They need to be incredibly clever in the transfer market to have a good summer. And for 3 windows, which is why yesterday was a bit bigger, they haven't bought anybody. So that was it was a backs to the wall job. This is what we've got, lads. Let's see if we can win this.
Yeah. Don't worry, Newcastle fans. That's not the bum note to end on. We are going to come back to Newcastle and Dan Burn at the very end of the show. But we are going to take a quick break, which means it's time for the quiz question. Who am I talking about when I say a former footballer who won the League Cup with Middlesbrough in 2004 and also played for Coventry, Aston Villa and Hull? Nice and easy. Find out after the break.
Townsend.
Welcome back to the Game Football Podcast from The Times. I'm Tom Clark and I've got Martin Hardy, Alison Rudd and Gregor Robertson with me. And Who knows? Maybe sore heads in the room on a Monday morning.
It's the one time I get named first.
Honestly. Well, you do cover the Northeast, which does include...
Every 70 years I get named first.
Middlesbrough. It does include Middlesbrough, Martin. And none of you, not even producer Neil. Producer Neil normally bails you out. None of you got George Boateng. None of you. You didn't really.
What do you mean? It might have taken a while, but I got George Boateng.
You took about 20 minutes.
Okay.
This is like countdown. We should start a clock. And it wasn't quick enough, I'm afraid.
Right.
By your
That's
standards.
a new rule.
Yeah, well, I've just, sharpen you up. Come on, lively. Let's go. Second half of the show. And we're going to kickstart it by talking about Fulham. An excellent win against Tottenham Hotspur. Alison Rudd, you were there for us at this game, which, by the way, Tom Allnut, who was also with you at the game, Alison, and who's conspicuously absent from this show. Do you remember last week's discussion, Gregor, about most entertaining games in the Premier League? Martin, I don't know whether you heard this segment, but I was talking about Manchester United, Arsenal getting the 4:00 billing on Sky Sports, and I said, it's time to sack them off, isn't it? They're both too boring. What game would you pick for the most entertaining game? And our colleague Tom Allnut said, Fulham-Tottenham. That would be the most entertaining game. And I can reveal that other conversations that happen on the editorial floor with reporters at games, he texted me at half-time and said, bad call that. Really bad call.
It took him that long to realise.
Yeah. Well, actually, it was more 20 minutes in. He said, we're going to have a big turnaround here for me to be right about this game. Alison Rudd, would you say that was a fair assessment of the first half, at least?
Maybe. I was surrounded by people being a bit sniffy about it. I found it entertaining. Maybe I'm just have a low bar of entertainment. I don't know, but there was a lot that was pretty. When I said, I used the word pretty in the press box, my colleagues were going, "Oh, is that your headline? Pretty game of football unfolded at Craven Cottage." But
I'm going to do that one day. I'm going to put that on headline on one of your pieces. Pretty game of football.
There was a lot that was pretty about Fulham in a relatively dull first half, but there was lots of vignettes all over the pitch, and I think they were important because they spoke of how relaxed Fulham were, the smaller club up against the big club Spurs, and not treating them with any respect whatsoever. Prepared to do the odd flick, the odds, showboating, whatever. They were not scared of Spurs at all. Spurs were very dull, one of the reasons Tom Allnut said this would be a classic game is because Spurs are so darned entertaining even when they lose, but they weren't even that entertaining. Yeah, but they weren't losing because they were being entertaining. They were just very flat.
Martin's coming in, bringing everyone down there. Liverpool are crap. Salah's bottled it. Tottenham are rubbish.
Where's your trophies?
Yeah.
So
it's been one day since Newcastle won a trophy.
Full of it. Absolutely full of it.
Not quite a day.
Anyway, Alison.
So it felt like the second half would be better, and it did. Again, it took a while to but the last sort of 15 minutes were fantastic, absolutely fantastic.
They were, yeah.
And I hate saying, but I often say, well, that was a well-deserved victory, because just as you would say, Newcastle's victory was well-deserved. It wasn't a smash and grab, for example.
Sure.
They deserved it over the balance of play. Here, Fulham were the team playing the attractive, fearless, entertaining football, and then. They took the lead through Muniz, fine, nice goal. But the beautiful moment was in the 87th minute, Ryan Sessegnon comes off the bench. Now, Ryan Sessegnon was on the cover of the Matchday programme, and there was a very, very long, there were about 8 pages devoted to him in the programme about how happy he was to be back at the club where he was age 6 when he joined. He's definitely a homegrown talent, and he moved to Spurs in 2019. And some people would have said, is that a good or bad move for him? It ended up being a bad move for him. I mean, he was hampered by hamstring injury, but he just didn't make his way into the team at all. And they feel like wasted years, really. And last summer, he came back to Fulham. And again, they're a well-functioning team that didn't really need him too much. So he comes on in the 87th minute. It's against his former club. He would have preferred to have started or had it longer on the pitch.
Yeah.
But he comes on. Fulham fans give him a beautiful rendition of He's One of Our Own. You could see his chest puffed out when he got that. It's 87 minutes, slightly embarrassing, but the crowd are giving it. His first touch is there's a long ball out from the goalkeeper. He completely bamboozles Ben Davies and scores with his weaker right foot. It's a beautiful goal. It's like
absolutely bullies Ben Davies as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Completely bullies
him. You kind of think this is the stuff you put in comic books. This isn't real because you're not supposed to be able to have an impact that quickly as an 87th minute substitute. And he did. And his celebration was unlike, I think, celebrations you will see, because it was like a sort of, this is my life celebration. So he was lots pressing of his heart and pressing to the skies, but it was all about he was in that moment, he was thanking the fans, he was thanking the club, he was showing that he could put behind him his disappointments of having a fairly miserable time at Spurs, and it was against Spurs, and it was his first goal at Craven Cottage since coming back. And, it was like a sort of vignette, a reminder of all that Fulham loved about him as a player. He could do anything. He could defend, he could be a winger, he could also finish well. He seemed like, a real superstar, and he sort of made, things had gone slightly wrong with him, and he's back and he's making an impact. These things don't always happen as beautifully as that, like so much negativity and sadness, and then, wow, you're just reminding everybody why we loved you in the first place. But the fact that the fans had given him that rendition before he did anything just meant the whole thing felt very, very beautiful. And so I was really glad to be there.
Lots of beauty and emotion on this podcast already.
Football, eh?
Gregor, you've got a real task to come when you come to you and Ipswich and the relegated teams, if you're going to speak as eloquently as these two have been about the games that they were at. Alison, just a second question for you from this game on Tottenham then. Big game in the week, getting through that Europa League game. They're still in with a trophy. Ange can still win a trophy in his second season. But his point in the quotes piece that Tom Allnutt wrote for the game about Ange saying, we can't just sack off the league, but also you do start to think maybe you have.
Well, I felt like it's a bit, I know I've slagged off Ange a lot on this podcast.
Yes,
right?
you have.
But honestly, how hypocritical is that? Because he makes 7 changes from the team that beat Alkmaar, and then he says, I don't want the players thinking that it's all about the Europa League. Duh. That's what your lineup is saying. Your lineup is saying we don't really care too much about this game at Craven Cottage. It's a London derby. We'd get you 3 points, get you into the top half of the table eventually if you keep building on that. Do you have no pride in your league position? It just seemed very strange. Also, we're ahead of an international break. So in that press conference afterwards, he said it was really important to make sure the team were fresh so they'd come back after the international break for the run of fixtures they've got. This is the first time, really, I've heard managers say, we want to go into the international break on a win. We want to, before I lose all my players, I want us to all feel like we're in a good place. I've never heard a manager saying, I think I just want to rest players for a key Premier League game because I want them to be in a good mindset when we eventually get back to playing European football after an international break. That just makes no sense to me at all. Surely you'd be better off going into the international break having defied what people are expecting of you, which is a limp display at a team on the up. Instead, they just fall into that characterisation of having nothing in the league to fight for. I find, and for then to Postecoglou to sort of blame the players for coasting a little bit doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, well, Fulham definitely do have something to fight for in
Lots
the league.
To fight for.
In up to 8th on 45 points. Brighton
3 points off a Champions League place.
Brighton and Newcastle both ahead of them on 47. Manchester City on 48. And Chelsea, after a dismal performance against Arsenal, I'm not even going to dwell on it too much. It was absolutely dreadful. Arsenal worked much better, but at least they got the win. Chelsea currently in 4th. Martin, what do you think about looking at those teams, obviously Newcastle as well, in that mix? When you're looking at how it's shaping up, do you go back to the experience of Manchester City? They'll get over the line. They'll get one of those spots. Of course, Martin Ziegler writing in the Times pages at the weekend that England could have basically half the league. Basically half the league, I think, if Aston Villa can win a Champions League. But we'll probably get 5 slots at the very least.
Yeah, it might be sacrilege to say the best result for Newcastle this weekend was not winning the Cup, because the result for Chelsea getting beat, Man City drawn with Brighton, Bournemouth getting beat, suddenly Newcastle's win at West Ham, which was hard fought. It was 1-0. I was arguing with somebody that night saying this is a really, really good win. All they had to do was win, get some players fit, park the league, which they did. The league, it was a great weekend for Newcastle for every reason. They will now go, we can get 4th. They haven't got the FA Cup to worry about. The league
on a high.
They're on a high, yeah. They should be able to carry that momentum, and they should now go, we can finish top 4, top 5. And everything about Man City, the language from Guardiola feels quite defeated. It's like we aren't there. We can't quite get there. The fans know that. He's saying the atmosphere has changed. There is those middle clubs like Bournemouth. They have runs and then they drop. They don't have the consistency. All you got to do is get a bit of form now for the rest of the season. Newcastle's next fixtures are Brentford, Leicester, Man U, Palace, and you think you should be able to get, 9 points from there?
God, he is on a high. Listeners, I can confirm this is the most positive I've worked with you quite a while now, Martin, and honestly, I ring you up to talk about ideas sometimes. You're like, no, we're not going to. Absolutely no chance. Gregor, just quickly looking at those places, and Chelsea, of course, as I mentioned, in that game against Arsenal, which was dreadful, which is why we're not dwelling on it. But they're in fourth at the minute. This is a huge 2 weeks for Enzo Maresca, isn't it, to kind of get his players regrouped. Cole Palmer dropping out of the England squad is probably quite helpful for them to try and help him get some form and fitness back, and they need to come back and hit the ground running, don't they?
Yeah, I don't know where they've gone. I mean, what happened to them? What happened to
They were title contenders in December.
Yeah, that was a bit giddy. That was a bit, people got overexcited then. But
yeah, that was me. Sorry.
At the same time, like, this is an opportunity. As we're saying, there are no real kind of Nottingham Forest are a surprise. Man City are falling away. There are a lot of teams who are going on good runs and threatening to break in, but this is an opportunity for Chelsea in a league that's not at its strongest to get in the Champions League.
Sorry, sitting around the table with people who watch more of Chelsea than I, do they need to change manager?
I don't think so.
He's throwing grenades today. I absolutely love it. Absolutely love it.
I
There was an interesting point in James Gearbrandt's report that Arteta made.
Yeah, bonkers.
Yeah, that they're like
Chelsea are the best attacking team in the league. By far was the quote. By far. Absolutely crackers.
It feels increasingly like these guys are like, some kind of philosophical, like, I don't know.
Go on, Grandpa. Do it. Go on.
I don't know, they're studying football at university and finding out how to break down a team with this kind of press and this kind of, when they're playing this formation, this is what you've got to do. And that's what this game looked like. It's like two guys trying to out-scratch each other's heads.
But a lot of games start like that. Now for 25 minutes, 30 minutes, you're like, somebody's got to get tired, make a mistake, have a fight, and then the football will start.
I mean, Chelsea were quite snarky in this game. Like they were
very much so. Fofana should have been sent off.
Could have been off. There was a little moment in the first half when Caicedo just kept running around, barging into everyone and trying to leave one on.
That's true. I wanted to ask you about that. It really, really wound me up because I always think if you're Mo Salah and you get kicked a lot and you throw the arms up in the air, that's fine because you're Mo Salah and you don't do a lot of kicking yourself. When you're someone like Caicedo who does a lot of kicking and you get kicked and you go, how dare you kick me? You're like, no, mate.
I'm the kicker.
This is fair play. This is fair play. You can only do the kind of big drama, stroppy thing if you like that. Anyway, sorry, I just had to get that off my chest.
There are moments you just watch Chelsea sometimes too, and it's not always, but sometimes you think he's overthinking this. Why is Reece James playing in midfield?
Yeah.
And you've got Fofana at right back.
Yeah,
and why is Barry Shealy in the team?
Yeah.
He's not good enough, and they have players who are better than him on the bench. Why is this happening?
Yeah.
And there are times at the start of the season you looked at their wide forward areas and you thought, crikey, they're well stacked here, and now you can't pick one. They're an absolutely mind-bending team. Fernandes looks like he would have been expensive at half the price. Like, people there was little moments and periods in his career at Chelsea where you go, yeah, we're starting to see Enzo Fernandes.
Yeah.
No, that was a nonsense of a signing at 100 and whatever million.
230 million for Caicedo and Fernandes.
Like, Caicedo's had a really good season, I think. It was slightly interrupted when they also tried to make him right back and then invert into midfield, and the flow was disrupted. He's had a good season, and he's a great midfielder.
So do they need a new manager? Because it sounds like they do.
Well,
this is the modern manager.
There's the big picture and the smaller picture. In microcosm, you'd say maybe, because what did Maresca do? What has he been doing to alter the momentum of a game when it's not going well? Against Arsenal, he just replaced like for like. There was no change of shape, no imagination, no switching of positions. No, you say that managers sometimes act like they're in some sort of seminar and discussing, trying to outwit each other. He didn't actually do anything witty. He didn't do anything clever in this. It's as though he very, very firmly believes that what he's started with is correct, and he's not going to change, even though the game is drifting away from them. It's I don't know. I think a lot of Chelsea fans will have started to think, not sure about him.
I said this game was crap and we weren't going to talk about it. This
I
is
remember
impressive.
speaking after the Leicester game where they scraped a 1-0 on that, I think it was. And
yes.
Yeah.
And he spoke after like he was affronted that they'd changed the formation. They'd gone to 5 at the back and like we didn't see this coming. All our plans all week were completely ruined. Like, well, this is what management is. It's not all. I don't know.
There it is, the trademark sigh.
There is another team playing today.
There are things that are not his fault. Like they spent 1.3 billion and they don't have a striker. Like there are things that are still just bamboozling, and then they sign another teenager for 45 million who's a maybe. They just keep signing maybes. So yeah, the Chelsea project is mad.
They've missed Nicholas Jackson, although he wasn't as prolific as he should have been. It was
Improved,
very useful to the flow of play.
You should have 2 forwards if you spend 1.2
If you spend £1 billion, you shouldn't have Jackson as your forward.
But to answer your question, Martin, that was the small picture. The bigger picture is when Chelsea were having that purple patch, and we were thinking they're going to be far better than we thought this season. He kept talking it down.
Yeah.
He did not enjoy it or embrace it.
I know a lot of people thought that was a big thing, but he was right.
There are ways of managing. There are ways of managing success.
Maybe.
Well, it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy to keep saying this isn't real.
Yeah, that is true. You keep telling people they're bad, they will eventually become bad.
Well, there you go, Chelsea.
There you go. End. There you go.
No, you spoke about the goalkeeper.
Oh no!
Flapping
Oh my
things
God,
all
that
day.
was absolutely crackers. Anyway,
1.3 billion, no goalkeeper, no forward.
Yeah.
Well done.
sack the board, sack the manager. Martin Hardy's coming in, throwing absolute
go.
grenades all over the place.
I mean, Jim Radcliffe did it for us, didn't he?
Yeah.
Oh, don't start on Jim
Radcliffe.
Radcliffe.
In Martin Samuel's interview, said they cocked it up in the first 2 years,
Yes.
and then they started doing all right, and people forgot about it.
Yes.
Well, everybody's remembering now.
Well, speaking of Jim Ratcliffe, he'll have been delighted to see Manchester United get another win against Leicester. But I wanted to briefly mention Leicester in relation to Ipswich, Gregor, because you were at Ipswich to watch another big win for Nottingham Forest. They keep proving they've got the staying power to stay in that top four. Those top four places. But you are writing a piece this week about the relegation places and about this growing trend of the teams who come up not being able to compete and going back down again with a low points tally. And I think this weekend is another evidence of that. Not just at your game, Paul Hurst ringing me from this Manchester United win as the man covering United, and I'm going, you know, this big for Amorim, isn't it? He's like, I'm going to do it on Leicester. They were absolutely dreadful. And I was like, fair enough, there you go. But that speaks to your exact theme, doesn't it, Greg?
Yeah, and then obviously Wolves, who were the only team out of the rest of the 17 other teams that they could possibly have reeled in, beat Southampton. So it's terminal this weekend. They're all doomed. And
yeah, I thought that.
I mean, as you say, this is the second year in a row. That was the first time since 1998, last season, that all three promoted teams were relegated, and only the second time ever. And now it's happening in back-to-back seasons. And the points haul last year was 66 cumulative between the three teams, 66 points. That was 10 fewer, than the lowest before that.
Yeah.
And this year they could get 10 points fewer again. It could possibly be like 56 points.
Because this is also some research that we found, isn't it? Of when even we've talked on the podcast before about Derby County and the terrible seasons. Even in those seasons, the other two teams who went down both got 35 and 36 points, I think.
Yeah, I look back, there was I think once in the last 10 seasons or something, I think Newcastle were the only team who had 35 points or more and went down.
Yeah, under Rafa.
And then if you went back 5 years before that, like half the teams got more than 35 points.
It used to be an average of about 34.7 when Newcastle went like now.
Yeah, the average has plummeted. It's been trending down for a long time, but it's now particularly stark. And the thing you got to mention as well is that Ipswich were the 13th highest spending team in the world last summer.
Yeah, they had a go, didn't they? Which
they
makes
spent
it
£106 million. That's according to Transfermarkt. That's roughly. Southampton were 15th. And I think the team above Ipswich was Bayern Munich, and the team between them was Al Hilal. So it's that's a snapshot there of where the Premier League lies in sort of the global landscape, and they're still miles off it. And it's not. You have to give there's context. Ipswich were in League One 2 years ago.
Yep.
They've had a remarkable journey. Kieran McKenna, when it was put to him on Saturday, you've got a mountain to climb now. He said, we've had a mountain to climb all season, but now the gap's big and it looks hard. But Southampton and Leicester have spent one season in the last decade, roughly, a bit more for Southampton, outside the Premier League. They are Premier League teams, and they went straight down. Leicester 97 points, I think, last season. You know,
That's
ran away the
last
league.
season.
They did lose their manager. They did lose Dewsbury Hall. But even for clubs like that, I mean, people look to next season now and you've got Leeds, surely they'll have a chance. No, probably not. They'll need to be brilliant in the transfer market. Daniel Farke's going to have to do something that he's never done before. I think the most points he's got at Norwich is 26. Norwich didn't spend a lot often as well. But it's hard for anyone now because like the middle class being really good kind of widens the gap. People like Oliver Glasner and at Palace.
Yeah.
Raiola at Bournemouth. Teams are operating really smartly. And there was a conversation with a director in the Premier League recently. There's all talk about parachute payments and what this does to the championship as well. It's damaging the championship, but also if they were to be taken away, it would damage promoted teams' ability to spend. Yeah. And now lots of clubs in the Premier League are looking around thinking, let's get rid of them. Yeah. It makes it even harder.
Super League.
We're entrenched completely.
Super League. It's happened with it. We didn't realise it and it's already happened. Listeners, you can read.
There might be a few people talking, like we'll say, what about Forest? What about Bournemouth? What about Fulham?
Yep.
That's the anomaly. It's 10 out of the last 15 now of promoted teams will have gone straight back down. So that year is the anomaly. Yeah. This is now the norm.
But what beautiful anomalies.
Lovely anomalies indeed. But you can read Gregor's piece on the Times website very soon. When can you read it, Gregor? Now I'm going to put you on the spot. When are you going to file? Tonight. Great. Wonderful. Now we've taken a downward turn in terms of the positivity stakes, but we're going to bring it back by letting Martin Hardy have the final word about Dan Burn. Because not only did the hometown boys score a goal in the cup final, he's also got an England call-up. Has there ever been a better couple of days? Now, Martin, bear in mind how you started the show. I'm going to give you a time limit here. We've got about 2 or 3 minutes. But Dan Burn, what a wonderful story for him to have not only scored this goal, but also got a call-up. Your time starts now.
Yeah,
Neil's ready to fade out. 1 minute, Neil says.
We write all these words we hope that are beautiful, and you watch your phone for Twitter and you get 10 likes, 15 likes. or you take a picture of a 6'7" centre-half with a medal and you check your phone last night, it's got 1,300 likes. His story is phenomenal from somebody who was in Newcastle's development squad. He wasn't actually in their academy, and they chose not to keep him when he was 11, 16. He stays on at school. He's working in Asda. He's a Darlington YTS player. And Eddie Howe said on Friday, it's one of the great footballing comeback stories, and I think it's true. And he has clawed every single thing that he can out of his body in terms of, I thought this before this week, he's possibly one of the bravest players I've ever seen play for Newcastle, not just because of his physicality, because he's had rough games. He was played as a left back in that team that finished fourth, and he's not the quickest. And if he didn't have Joe Linton in front of him and Joe Willock running, then he would be exposed. And there was a few games where the fans were criticising him. Some players would run away and hide, and he just comes back, sticks his chest out, let's go again. It would be interesting if Sven Botman, the player that Newcastle and Eddie Howe love, had been fit. But he rises to every challenge, and he says, I came in 2022 in January. He said, I don't think they intended to keep me for long, but I went, right, I'll keep fighting. I'll fight for my place every day of my life. An interesting conversation with Eddie Howe recently was talking about Trippier, and possibly one of the reasons Dan Burn is in the England squad. He went, players like Trippier and Dan Burn are like a dying breed because they talk on the pitch. You can't get players like that anymore. And I think that's why Thomas Tuchel has included them.
And Anthony Barry, who was with him at Wigan.
So it's these players that talk. He leads the dressing room. He leads the club. There was a brilliant moment last season, I think, where he'd been doing stuff with some deaf children. And when Newcastle scored, he actually did the sign language to the kids. And you saw the kids in tears. You think, God, this bloke gets everything that you want Newcastle United to be. Used to have a season ticket with his dad. The goal he scores yesterday is right up there with Keith Houchin in terms of these iconic headed goals. And Arnie Slot, and I do an Arnie Slot impersonation. I've never seen a man head a ball this far before. Genuinely staggered. And I think Dan Burn craned his neck back to Blythe to generate the power to thump that ball in. The Keller got nowhere near it, and it was 15
Allison
yards.
would have saved it.
No, shut up, you.
Never got anywhere near it. What a story! What a weekend he's had. The only downside for Dan Burn is instead of drinking himself becoming a link with Dan Burn, he has to link up with the England.
I'm
squad first
sure
time.
he won't mind too much. But a wonderful summary of an amazing couple of days for Dan Burn, Martin Hardy and Alison Rudd and Gregor Robertson. Thank you very much for joining me on this show. As I mentioned, Dan Burn off to join up with England. We'll be talking about the international break on Thursday. We'll see you then.